The theme for this Lenten journey is seeking honest questions for a deeper faith, and it is put together, of course, by Sanctified Art. But I must admit, as this first Sunday of Lent rolled around and the scripture selection came forward, I wasn't really ready to ask honest questions about faith. Now, I love asking trivia questions. They have answers. But honest questions about our faith often just lead to more questions. I mean, if you can't answer the question, then you can't pass the test. And if you can't pass the test, you are deemed unworthy or less than. You failed the test. And while our faith is often tested, just as Jesus was tested in the wilderness, these tests have little to do with the right answers and more to do with the right relationship with God. But of course, our relationships with God, as we talk about, are multi-layered. They are both sinful and spirit-filled encounters. And sometimes what we have been taught is spirit-filled is actually sinful. And what we were taught is sinful is actually spirit-filled. And we have acknowledged this through the ways that Jesus was often able to turn what others saw as negative and wrong into actually what is deserving and beloved. And let us not fool ourselves. Engaging in those difficult shifts of love is what crucified Jesus and led to that cross. And it can often feel that it is crucifying us. It is like the evils of the world are coming at us on the mountain when we are already depleted and we are set up to fail. And so we have to ask the difficult question: does God set us up to fail? Am I allowed to ask that question? I mean, anybody waiting for that kind of question for divine retribution, like lightning to come down and just strike? I mean, clearly there are so much brokenness in relationships between God and humanity. We see that in so much of the biblical story. But does God get any blame or accountability? I mean, why do we as humans get all the blame if we're just human and God is God? Can God have limits? And these types of questions are why I do not want to ask questions about a deeper faith. These types of questions are the types of questions that get people fired and even killed. These types of questions label a person as bad, or they cause problems. These types of questions turn a person into a serpent who decides to ask the forbidden questions. Yet, it is the questions that we have, nonetheless. It is the questions we sometimes think quietly to ourselves and hope that no one overhears our brain thinking. It is the questions of doubt. It is the questions of accountability that often we don't voice until our world is crumbling and God seems silent. But maybe it isn't God who has been silent. Maybe it is us, afraid that God may not live up to being God, or we may not live up to being gods. Lent is a time when we are invited to struggle with what it means for God to be God and for what it means for us to be gods. And it means that we do have to ask hard, dangerous, and big questions of our faith. And many of those questions and misunderstandings come from the scripture we read today. Many refer refer to this story as the story of original sin. Even though, I will tell you once again, the first time the word we understand as sin is used in the Bible is actually found when Cain killed Abel. And yet, the question is often asked, who is to blame in this story? Who sinned? The serpent for tempting Eve, Eve for eating the fruit, Adam for not even questioning anything, just going, okay, sure, I'll eat it. Or would we even argue or dare to argue that God might be to blame? If you read the story closely, there are a lot of half-truths. God lied. God told Adam and Eve that if they would eat, they would die. And while that's true, if God had told them the whole truth, the story may have been a little different in how they responded. The serpent wouldn't have had any extra information, that extra information that makes you curious and go, I wonder. Because what the serpent said was a little different. You're not going to die yet. You'll just become like God. Or maybe God thought the temptation of telling Adam and Eve the whole truth would just be too much. And like any good parent figure, made the consequences a little more extreme than what the reality was. And they did die, but not immediately. And while all of this is fascinating to think about, actually none of it was written or shared for hundreds of years to be analyzed this way. Just like any origin story, the people who shared this were not wondering about factual things. They weren't wondering who was to blame, but they were instead wondering, as we often do, about the big questions of life, of why are certain things broken, or why do they feel broken? Why do we have childbirth? Because so many people die from it. Why do we die? Is always a huge question. Or why do we have to work so hard to find our food and to live in society? Why are there good things and evil things intermingled? Why do we as humanity seem to be broken and far away from Eden? The type of Eden defined as delight. Where is our delight in our life? Where is our ability to delight in God? Thus, how can we find delight in the brokenness? Can we still enjoy the broken crayons? Can we celebrate the clock that is right twice a day? Can we remember that God has not left us even though we must wander in different ways than expected? Can we see that the poison of the snake can also be the medicine that heals? Yes. Yes, we can transform in the ways that Jesus showed us. But only when we are willing to recognize that we have lost our innocence long ago. That we are called to move into a mature faith. That pretending to only ask the right questions often limits the possibility of asking the God questions. And just like teenagers question their parents, God understands that we will question God so that we can continue to mature in a more profound way to be God's creation in this broken world. And then we can come back around to trusting that God really does have our best intentions at the center of God's deep love. The question asked by our sermon series this week is, who will you listen to? As we leave the garden, as we recognize that we are not in the places of delight, are we allowing ourselves to be transformed? Are we recognizing that we are no longer naive? We are no longer unlimited in our time? To pretend that we are in Eden and in a simplified faith may be actually what currently tempts us. But we know just enough to know that staying in a place of constant delights while others suffer is not what we are called to do as followers of Christ. We are called to heal what is broken. We are called to name that blame and misunderstanding is not what actually heals people, especially of some of the scriptures. This one in particular that has broken many relationships with God and with those who claim love as their guide. And so I want to encourage all of us to listen in a new way this Lenten season. Ask those difficult questions loudly, proudly, and with an ability to trust that God is God and God will rise up to your challenges. And make sure that you are able, as we are able, to listen beyond our limited experiences and understandings. We often call adolescence the time of coming of age. And for many of you, I'll be honest, those years were a long, long time ago. But I think we fail our faith if we only mature in it once. So all of us during Lent are called to go through another coming of age experience. Therefore, we won't fail our faith if we forget to question. Instead, we will question in ways that young people often do. And we won't fail our faith because we will work to listen to the different voices and a variety of voices that bring wisdom so that we will know which ones bring blame and how to distinguish which ones bring wisdom. And when one brings both wisdom and blame, we will not fail our faith because we will have worked and struggled to know which one to hear. My favorite coming of age story is Dead Poets Society. I think it is one of the most profound stories told in my lifetime. And so I will leave you today as we move forward with this image and thought. I stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in a different way. Thus, we are constantly called to look and listen to our faith differently in this Lenten season. Are you ready to listen and look and experience and ask those hard questions this Lent? That was another hard question.